So by now, I'm pretty sure that unless you've been living in a cave for most of your life, then chances are you are very much well aware of who Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees are. Two mask-wearing psychotic maniacs with an insatiable appetite for death and mayhem, no surprise there. But what if we were to take these two walking abominations and pit them up against each other to see which one of them would walk away as the superior killer? Which of course the fan bases for both characters are going to be divided for this, but for starters, let's go on ahead and take a quick look at the stats to see how these two measure up against each other, which of course on one side, we have Rob Zombie's rebooted variation of Michael Myers from both Halloween 1 and Halloween 2, standing at a terrifyingly impressive height of 6'9" with an approximate weight of about 290 pounds, which is without a shadow of a doubt the biggest Michael Myers that we've ever seen in any other Halloween movie. Whereas over on the other side, we have the 2009 rebooted variation of Jason Voorhees, who stands at an impressive height of 6'5" with an approximate weight of about 225 pounds, which again is very impressive in its own right. But what about feats, you may ask? Well, beginning with strength, Rob Zombie's Michael Myers is an absolute monster. One of his most notable strength feats within the Halloween movies was Michael's ability to both lift and transport a 1,000 plus pound tombstone. Now, by comparison, a similar feat nearly killed off Eddie Hall, who is a world-renowned strongman, when he himself had attempted in breaking the world record at the time by deadlifting 1,100 pounds. So by no means is Rob Zombie's Michael Myers weak. As a matter of fact, when fighting Joe Grizzly within the bathroom of a truck stop, Michael Myers had effortlessly slammed Joe's head into a steel wall over and over and over again and having to bend it, which pretty much confirms that with enough force, Michael Myers is actually able to even bend steel. Even at a point was he able to flip over a car, which pretty much averages in around 2,900 pounds when looking at it, and Michael Myers was able to do that with complete and utter ease. But what about Jason Voorhees? Now, Jason Voorhees is quite the threatening individual himself, and his strength does play a part in that because in 2009's rebooted Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees was actually able to not only demonstrate feats of strength by impaling several grown adult males in lifting their bodies up off the ground with complete ease, which mind you, these fully grown adult males average in at about 200 pounds apiece, and Jason Voorhees was able to not only impale them by lifting them up, but was also able to throw them around several feet with complete and utter ease as well. So on top of being able to throw around adult males with complete ease, Jason Voorhees had also used a fire poker to stab straight through an officer's head, which had gone on to go through several solid objects, including breaking floorboards with his machete, which when done over and over and over again from the bottom does require a lot of strength for one to do so with succession. So when looking at strength itself by comparison to the rebooted variation of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, I think it's safe to say that Rob Zombie's Michael Myers by comparison is stronger than 2009's Jason Voorhees. But what about speed? Now, there's no question that Jason Voorhees does take the speed advantage over Michael Myers because Michael Myers never truly displayed any acts of speed within Rob Zombie's Halloween, but instead, by comparison, Jason Voorhees was demonstrating feats of having to run and perform several acts of agility himself, which allowed him to be placed at an advantage when it comes down to speed, because if all Michael Myers does is walk and Jason Voorhees is also able to walk, run, and use agility feats to get around his opponent, then I think it's safe to say that Jason Voorhees takes the speed advantage over Michael Myers. Now, what about intelligence? Which one of these two is in fact the smarter individual? And Jason was actually shown to be rather the intelligent individual himself, because although we don't know how long it took him to do this, we do know for an absolute fact that Jason Voorhees was in fact actually able to set up a security system around Camp Crystal Lake to alert him when intruders are around the area, and setting up an entire floodlight system around the camp itself. Which, on top of that, one of the hallmarks to this version of Jason is the usage of Jason having to come up with traps. Now, during the events of 2009's Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees had actually gone on to establish several different traps within the Camp Crystal Lake area, including capturing nets and bear traps, which Jason ultimately uses as bait around Camp Crystal Lake. Rob Zombie's Michael Myers, however, had also been proven to be a decently intelligent person, but by comparison, there is nothing that Michael Myers had done within Rob Zombie's Halloween that would showcase for him to be any more intelligent than 2009's Jason Voorhees. So when it comes down to the overall intelligence factor, I would have to say that Jason Voorhees takes the intelligence feats over Rob Zombie's Michael Myers. But notably enough, enough, there is something that Rob Zombie's Michael Myers does hold over Jason Voorhees, and that's the rage incentive. Now, when taking a look at what Rob Zombie's version of Michael Myers does, once of course he goes on to put his mask on, Michael Myers is then seemingly enough engulfed in absolute rage, and when doing so, becomes extremely violent to the point where in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2, when Michael Myers carries on in going on an absolute rampage, Michael Myers is shown having to act very aggressively by comparison to 2009's Jason Voorhees, which I guess it's safe to say when it comes down to pure rage and pure anger itself, Rob Zombie's Michael Myers does hold that advantage over 2009's Jason Voorhees. Michael is shown acting more on aggression, Michael is shown acting more on instinct, whereas Jason tends to more or less bait and trap his victims before carrying out acts of violence. So when looking at both of their mindsets and where they may be in this fight, there is no doubt that Michael Myers, by comparison to Jason Voorhees, would be in this case more or less the aggressor by comparison to his opponent. But what about their weaknesses? Now, Michael Myers doesn't necessarily have any flat out weaknesses in Rob Zombie's Halloween, which as a matter of fact, the only thing that could be looked at as a weakness for Rob Zombie's Halloween are certain scenarios of Michael's family having to be presented to him, specifically anything involving his mom, which could ultimately overwhelm Michael's mindset to concentrate until he snaps back into it in going back and acting on instinct and violence itself. Jason Voorhees, on the other hand, kind of has a similar weakness in the fact that once Jason is kind of reminded about his mom in any kind of capacity, it then goes on to confuse and pacify Jason for a moment before Jason could go on to once again, just like Michael, snap back into his own by having to then target his victims in taking them down. But even then, I think it's safe to say that neither Michael or Jason is going to bring up the other's mommy issues in this battle because, well, they just simply don't talk. Now, when going into these battles, today we're going to be presenting 3 separate battle scenarios in which Michael and Jason are going to be placed in, with of course the first being Camp Crystal Lake. Now, Camp Crystal Lake will obviously serve a huge advantage for Jason Voorhees, considering the fact that number one, Jason Voorhees would obviously have access to all of the traps that we've seen within the Friday the 13th reboot, along with also being able to access the tunnel system underneath the camp, his security system that he has set up, and of course the biggest factor of them all, which just so happens to be the lake itself, which we know once Jason goes inside, the lake itself sort of becomes a healing system for Jason as Jason is able to regenerate. So when taking the rebooted concepts of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, and if placed within the battlegrounds of Camp Crystal Lake, then there is no doubt that Jason Voorhees under those circumstances would be able to defeat the rebooted Michael Myers. Now, when moving on to the second battle scenario, the second battle scenario will take place in Haddonfield, specifically within the Michael Myers residence. Now, Michael Myers will have access to the entirety of his house as well as his knife, and with all things considered, Michael Myers would know his house a lot better than Jason Voorhees, on top of the overall fact that Michael would not only draw inspiration and be influenced by the overall essence of what happened within his household, in which draws all the way back to his childhood ever since murdering his sister Judith Myers, but would also place Jason Voorhees at a significant disadvantage considering the fact that he wouldn't have access to Camp Crystal Lake, which of course we know that despite the overwhelming substantial damage that Michael Myers would inflict on Jason Voorhees would not be able to regenerate unless of course diving into Camp Crystal Lake himself, which ultimately begs the question if Jason Voorhees would be somehow able to outsmart or at least outmuscle Michael within his own household. So that battle scenario would obviously favor Michael Myers more so than Jason Voorhees. However, the third battle scenario would happen to take place in a field, somewhere where it's far away from Haddonfield and Camp Crystal Lake, which by then one must ultimately beg the question, if we don't have any significant advantages for both Michael and or Jason, then on a mutual battleground, who would walk away the winner? And by the end of it, there is no doubt that both Michael and Jason would put up quite the fight against each other, as the fight itself really wouldn't be a battle of words, but more or less a battle of wit and brute strength, which says a lot for the two characters, as of course this would be a battle of endurance and unnatural power. Neither one of the two would likely back down from the other, so there is bound to be a definitive winner by the end, no matter how you want to look at it. There would be blood, there would be mayhem, there would be carnage, and there would be no doubt a winner when it's all said and done. So who do you think would win by the very end when looking at both rebooted Michael Myers and rebooted Jason Voorhees? Let us know what you guys think in the comment section below and who you believe would win by the end, and remember, we are only sticking to the rebooted version of Rob Zombie's Michael Myers along with 2009's Jason Voorhees, so there's really no need to include any of the other versions of both Jason and Michael when we're only sticking to the rebooted variations. And again, thank you all so much for watching. I do appreciate you guys for your time. We do in fact actually have a battle animation in which we're about to present to you guys right now for your enjoyment. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed. Tune back in for more, and we'll be seeing you all down the comment section below and in the next video. Enjoy the animated battle.